There are those who believe true crime is essentially exploitation, where cameras and microphones follow people at the worst times of their lives for other people's entertainment. And that is a fair point, worthy of our constant and passionate consideration. But as I was putting together tonight's episode, I had one thought. What would have happened if the cameras weren't there? What if no one saw what happened in a decade-old murder case and a young woman who got caught up in that case? If there were no cameras there, no one to witness what had happened and share the events, it's hard to know what, if anything, would have been done. And perhaps that's the most chilling aspect of tonight's episode. A cold case that demanded justice, even at the expense of the truth. This is Dead Sleep, True Crime for Bedtime. I'm your host and narrator and just about everything else, Nancy Miller. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are new to this podcast, I like to think of Dead Sleep as your ad-free, independent, mindful alternative to the typical murder show. So if you find a lot of true crime that's currently out there as too loud, too violent, and of course too packed with obnoxious ads, please join me in this podcast that is 100% entirely listener-supported. A lot of podcasts are raising their subscription fees, and I get it, they have to. But I am committed to keeping this affordable to just about everybody. So if you would like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so for about $5 a month via Spotify, Patreon, and Apple Podcasts. Now, as we settle in, it's important to note the source of this episode. This was originally drawn from a series by A&E called Accused, Guilty or Innocent. And as you might expect, this series follows one criminal case from the defendant's point of view, from beginning to end. Essentially from the point of indictment, through the trial, through the verdict, guilty or innocent. And it's a surprising nail-biter of a series. And I recommend you checking it out if you haven't already. But tonight's episode is one of those stories that stuck with me. The kind of thing where the second it's over, you have to Google around to find out, oh my God, what happened next? And so this episode reflects not only what was in the original A&E story, but the aftermath of a case that drew a lot of attention back in 2020. This is, of course, my version of events, and it's gathered from several sources in addition to the A&E series, which again, I will link to several of those sources in the show notes. This is a story I'm calling Stuck Together. Death came for Franklin Bonner twice. The first time was a January afternoon in 1951, when Franklin Bonner was just 10 years old. He and roughly a dozen of his friends played in the street just a few blocks from Franklin's house in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Back then, there were not a lot of parks for kids to play in, especially not for a bunch of black kids. Growing up in a city so segregated, it had separate streetcars for blacks and whites since the 1880s. A fact that wouldn't change anytime soon. And on this particular afternoon in January of 1951, the street was their playground. The boys' ages ranged from 5 years old to 15. All of them so busy laughing and running and shouting, they didn't see the car as it collided with the dump truck at the intersection. They didn't notice how, in its split second, the car careened towards the boys, plowing into them. The boys were knocked down like 10 pins in a bowling alley, as one witness described it. Many of the boys were seriously injured that day, including Franklin's 5-year-old brother, who suffered a severe head trauma and was rushed to the hospital. Franklin was just one of 2 children who was able to physically walk away, with just a few scratches and bruises. Young Franklin, who people called Cookie, went on with his life. He made the honor roll in high school, got married, got a job working for the city of Chattanooga, had a family, a son and 3 daughters, then grandchildren, then the loss of one wife, then marrying a second wife. And by the age of 68, he enjoyed his retirement, padding any city pension by selling a little weed on the side. Not bales of it, just a few joints here and there to his friends and friends of friends. Cookie was also known as Lottery Man because he did indulge in a little bit of gambling, a numbers racket that's been going on in that neighborhood and a lot of neighborhoods since the time of the Italian Mafia a century earlier. And if you're the guy in the neighborhood known for having a little bit of weed and a lot of cash, well, you're going to have a lot of friends and maybe a few enemies. Death came for Cookie the second time, January 16th, 2009. Nearly 58 years to the day since that incident with the car. Only this time, Cookie the Lottery Man couldn't cheat death. That day, death won. It was just after 5 in the afternoon when a woman's raspy voice, choked with despair, begged the emergency dispatcher to please help. Her name was Linda Bonner. She had just come home from work to find the ranch-style brick house she lived in with her husband was completely ransacked. It looked like it'd been hit by a tornado. Cabinets flung open, debris all over the floor. Her husband's signature glasses. He'd worn Coke bottle specs since he was a kid. They were tossed on the ground next to an unlit cigarette. He too was on the floor, and he wasn't breathing. If the emergency dispatcher suggested CPR, Linda would have found it very difficult. Her husband was still attached to a dining chair, stuck to it by layers and layers of duct tape. From his crew-socked-clad ankles to the lengths of his arms, and most distressingly, someone had wrapped the entire circumference of his head in duct tape. Duct tape is strong stuff, made from a heavy-duty canvas material called duck cloth because it repelled moisture like water off a duck's back. Duct tape was invented as an adhesive to safely secure munition boxes back during World War II. Then a silver iteration of the tape called duct tape, D-U-C-T, was named because it was used in construction. In this case, This was duct tape, and it was a murder weapon. The thick adhesive strips obstructed the victim's mouth and nose, causing 68-year-old Franklin Bonner to suffocate to death. The coroner also noted signs of blunt force trauma. To investigators, it appeared to be a sloppy robbery that ended in a senseless murder. Cookie's death that January was the first murder in Chattanooga of 2009, but it wouldn't be the last. According to the Chattanooga Police Department's crime stats from 2009, there would be a total of 16 murders that year. But Cookie's murder would be remembered because it remained unsolved. Initially, there seemed to be a decent amount of evidence, fingerprints all over the place, including several impressions on that duct tape. This suggested there were at least 2 people involved, possibly more. Investigators believe the crime took place that afternoon, on Friday, sometime between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. They believed it was likely someone Franklin knew. But Franklin knew a lot of people. There were rumors, of course. Some suggested that the killer might have been Cookie's own wife, Linda. Something about an insurance policy, but nothing ever came of those rumors. For investigators, his wife wasn't even on their radar. She wasn't a person of interest, nothing close to a suspect. There were other leads, other individuals who were questioned over the years, but ultimately, there were no arrests. And despite having a whole mess of fingerprints on that duct tape, they couldn't find a match for any of those prints. And so the case stalled from 2009 to 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Over the years, Franklin Bonner's family rightfully wanted to know what was up with this case. And the lead detective, his name was Carl Fields. He assured them, oh, they were working on it. But in truth, many other cases were prioritized before this one. Carl Fields himself had homicides, assaults, heinous crimes that he had to figure out a way to solve by any means necessary. And what was necessary here was patience. They just had to wait. It was only a matter of time before these criminals made a mistake, got caught. It happened all the time. And when they did, those fingerprints would be uploaded into this database. And boom, they'd have their killers. It really was just a matter of time. These vicious murderers, they'd surface eventually. Thursday, June 14th, 2018. That day, like every day in the life of 23-year-old Angel Bumpass, was a rush to get things done. Angel was a busy young mother with 2 young daughters around preschool age. Angel's daughters were her everything, even if, she had to admit, not one thing turned out as she'd planned. When Angel left Chattanooga, Tennessee for Louisville, Kentucky at just 16, her big dream was to move to New York City. She wanted to work in fashion. She didn't know what kind of job she'd do. She just wanted to be close to the clothing, the makeup, the hair, the glamour. But before she could make it to New York City, she met a boy. She fell in love. She got pregnant and decided to stay in Louisville. And so now at 23, she was a single mom with primary custody, and she took a more practical path. She was studying to be a nurse's aide. A solid career, so she could give her daughters all the things she never had herself, beginning with having a mother at all. Angel's own mother vanished from her life when she was just 6 years old. Swallowed up by a system her mother tried to fight, a battle she lost in a spectacular failure back in 2002. Right around 23, the same age as Angel was now, her mother, Tamika, was a career con artist with so many fake IDs and various aliases. When she was arrested for forgery and fraud in Augusta, Georgia, back in 2002, she was booked under a fake name. And that wasn't the only thing she faked that day. She also feigned an illness. Tamika was inside a van, being transported from her court appearance back to jail when she complained to a sheriff's deputy named Glenda Shelton that she wasn't feeling well. The deputy cracked the plastic partition between the two to allow for some air. And it was here Angel's mother, Tamika, reached through the partition and began struggling with the deputy, which resulted in Tamika grabbing the deputy's own gun, using that gun to shoot this deputy on the left side of her chest. Then Tamika escaped the van, turned the gun on a passerby, and stole that man's pickup truck. Tamika remained at large for a good 12 hours before she was recaptured and in even bigger trouble than she was before. The sheriff's deputy survived and recovered, but any hopes of Angel being reunited with her mother died that day. Her mother would eventually be sentenced to 40 years in prison. And soon after, Angel was sent to live with her maternal grandparents, an arrangement no one was happy about, especially not her grandma. That's Tamika's mother, Shirley. Shirley wasn't some sweet, cookie-baking granny. She was young, maybe in her 50s, and as far as Angel could tell, her grandma Shirley did not want to have anything to do with raising more kids. Angel was appreciative of her grandparents. They never abused her, they never hurt her. They put a roof over her head and clothing on her back. But they didn't really show love for her. She was never tucked in, never kissed goodnight, never hugged. Angel's grandfather, Bayless, was a handyman. If she wanted to spend time with him, she would have to hang around his workshop in the garage, helping out. Hold this, hand me that. Otherwise, most of her other childhood memories were lonely. Angel wanted a better life for herself. So at the age of 16, she left Chattanooga altogether, moving a few hundred miles away to Louisville. And it was here she built her own world with her daughters at the center. A world that would fall apart that day in June of 2018, when Angel heard a loud banging on the front door of her apartment. When she opened the door, she saw angry men, local cops, yelling something at her with their hands on their hips. They wanted to know if she was Angel Bumpass. She said she was. They wanted to know if she was aware there was a warrant out for her arrest, and that she needed to come with them down to the local police station. Confused and a little frightened, Angel said, okay, she'd go. She didn't want any trouble, so she quickly arranged for childcare, someone to watch her little girls while she cleared up whatever this was. Then she went with the police. Angel figured she'd be back by dinner time. At the police station, she learned why she was under arrest. It all had to do with a speeding ticket back in 2017. Kentucky has some strict laws around speeding. If you get caught speeding in Kentucky at a certain amount above the speed limit, you are required to appear in front of a judge within 20 days of receiving your speeding ticket. There is no way to pay this fine by mail or online. Just about everyone who is caught speeding over a specific limit must take the day off from work, head down to the courthouse in person, and stand before a judge who will ultimately assess if you are a responsible and reliable driver. Then you are allowed to pay your ticket. If you fail to show up in court to address your speeding ticket, you are automatically categorized as FTA. That's short for failed to appear. And immediately, there's a bench warrant issued for your arrest. Now, it can take time for this arrest to happen. As with Angel's case, it took over a year. Lots of people miss these court dates. According to one stat, 1 in 4 people miss these court dates, and they do so for various reasons. Maybe they can't afford to take a day off from work. Maybe they forgot. Maybe the notice was sent to the wrong address. Maybe they're in their early 20s with 2 kids and have a lot on their mind. But whatever the case, in this traffic court, there were no excuses. So here she was at the police station, getting processed, mugshot, fingerprints, for this speeding ticket. Or so she thought. Angel would remember later, much later, too late, how someone did try to help her, to warn her. While she was at the police station, a female officer who helped fingerprint Angel told her in a low voice to get herself a lawyer. This woman confided there was something more to this story than just a speeding ticket, that she really needed to get a lawyer. Did she understand? Angel thanked the fingerprint lady for looking out for her, but she assured her this woman didn't need to worry because Angel hadn't done anything wrong. So why would she need a lawyer? But soon, she would learn. The police thought otherwise. In so many words, the cops in Kentucky told Angel Bumpass that she was wanted for felony murder in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She would soon learn how her fingerprints were found at the crime scene. 2 of her prints were found on those lethal strips of duct tape. Angel was confident to the point of defiance. They had this all wrong. This was obviously a mistake, because Angel hadn't lived in Chattanooga for years. She left in 2012. It was 2018. No, they assured her that the timing, it was just right. Because this murder, it happened when Angel lived in Chattanooga, back in 2009. Angel quickly did the math. If this murder happened in 2009, what were they saying? That she killed a man when she was 13 years old? That's exactly what the police were saying. And they let her know that there were authorities in Chattanooga who were more than ready to prove it. And before Angel knew it, she was escorted into the back of a vehicle not all that different from the one her mother once boldly escaped. Only Angel, she just sat, frightened and quiet, for the next 6 or so hours until they finally reached Hamilton County, Tennessee. Angel wasn't the only one who was confused. With simple braids and no makeup, Angel looked like a teenager. So when she arrived in Hamilton County, they took her to juvenile detention. But once Angel was accurately processed and charged, there was nothing juvenile about this case. Even though she was accused of killing someone when she was 13, she was apprehended as an adult and would therefore be treated as an adult, which meant the state of Tennessee was going to charge her with felony murder. And if found guilty, she'd receive an adult sentence. Angel was looking at 60 years in prison. It was too much to wrap her head around. She'd done everything she could to escape her family's legacy. When she was growing up, the Bumpass name was pretty well known to Chattanooga authorities. There was her mother, of course, but also her uncle, her brothers, even her grandmother had had run-ins with the law. She remembered her grandmother Shirley saying that Chattanooga police had it out for their family. But from Angel's point of view, all people needed to do was live a good, honest life. And now here she was, and her charges were the worst of them all. Murder. Now Angel did get a lawyer. 2 of them, actually. Public defenders from a local Tennessee law firm called Best, Hayduck, and Brock. Her lawyers were able to arrange a $30,000 bond for Angel, which allowed her to go back home to Louisville, be with her 2 daughters as they prepared her case to go to trial. The trial date was set for October of 2019. Over the next year, the case took over Angel's life, but she did her best to keep what was happening away from her girls. Angel remembered when she was around their age, how no one thought to protect Angel from the harsh realities of her mother's circumstances. She remembered feeling terrified and powerless. She worried about her mom constantly. She didn't want her girls to feel this way. So Angel kept up the facade. It helped her to put on a brave face. And for Angel, that meant literally looking flawless. Her hair, her nails, her makeup, everything shiny, polished, glossy, and perfect. Even if her reality was actually chaos. And her case got messier and messier by the minute. Angel learned through her attorneys that she had a co-defendant. A man Hamilton County prosecutors claimed was the leader of this thing. His name was Murray Vaughn. A name Angel swore she'd never heard before. But sometime between 2009 and 2018, police learned through a jailhouse snitch, who also happened to be Murray's cousin, that Murray Vaughn confessed that he'd robbed Franklin Bonner. But it seemed that was the only evidence the state had against Murray. A jailhouse snitch. And everyone knows, even if it's someone's cousin, snitches will say just about anything to get something in return. Angel's attorneys asked her if she knew Murray Vaughn. Angel looked at the photo. She saw a rough-looking older guy with an outward-turned left eye. She swore she'd never seen this man before. One of Angel's attorneys was a soft-spoken woman in her 30s named Andrea, who went to law school so she could work cases just like Angel's, instances where it seemed there was gross injustice before the trial even began. She believed Angel was innocent, but she made a point of noting, even if Angel had somehow assisted with this crime, say, handed over a piece of duct tape, she was 13 years old. She was likely coerced into those circumstances, and she didn't deserve to go to prison for 60 years. Andrea assured Angel if she did know anything about Marie Vaughn or anything about what happened that night, her testimony would be hugely valuable. It might be the very thing that would put Marie Vaughn away. And with her cooperation as a witness, Angel could go free. And maybe that's what all this was about from the beginning. That investigators knew Angel was involved somehow, but they knew she wasn't the killer. But perhaps they hoped by arresting Angel and squeezing her about what happened, threatening her with serious charges like murder, this would be enough to get Angel to crack, or to get someone else in her family to crack. Like her grandmother, Shirley. According to investigators back in 2009, Grandma Shirley was the last person to see Franklin Bonner. Back then, lead detective Carl Fields zeroed in on Shirley. They'd had dealings in the past. Shirley was known for being tough. Her record included assault, but most of the time, people knew better than to mess with Shirley. She was pretty on the outside, but cold on the inside, with a pair of fierce gray eyes that froze anyone in their tracks. For a time, they did wonder if Shirley had something to do with Franklin's murder. Back then, Shirley admitted to investigators she did see Cookie that day, and she'd even bought a little marijuana from him. But she had no reason to kill him. She'd known Cookie for years. The strange thing was, when Angel's fingerprints were confirmed in 2018 as a match to that duct tape, Shirley wasn't brought back into this renewed investigation. So from the point of view of Angel and her attorneys, this case made even less sense than before, cobbled together from a jailhouse snitch and a scant piece of evidence. Angel continued to maintain her innocence. She swore she had no idea who Marie Vaughn was, and she'd never been to Franklin Bonner's house. She didn't know anything about what happened that day. She had no idea how her fingerprints ended up on some duct tape, and she didn't have a relationship with her grandparents, especially not Grandma Shirley. They never went anywhere together. Never mind being a trusted partner in crime. No way, Angel said. That's not me. By October of 2019, when the trial was about to begin, there were still just two suspects, Angel Bumpass and Marie Vaughn. Angel and Marie were going to be tried together. Same courthouse, same judge, same jury, different legal teams. At first, this seemed like a bad idea. Lumping them together certainly made Angel look like she knew Marie, and that they were in this together. She would look guilty. But her attorneys believed this might be an advantage. If their cases were linked together, then their verdicts would be too. There was no physical evidence tying Marie Vaughn to this case. Furthermore, when the jailhouse snitch was interviewed, he implicated Marie, but said nothing about a 13-year-old kid. When questioned, Murray asserted his innocence and insisted he didn't know Angel either. With what little they had on Murray, there was no way to secure a conviction. And if the jury decided Murray wasn't guilty, then the same verdict would have to be applied to Angel, his so-called accomplice. Her attorneys made quick work of poking holes in the prosecution's case. It wasn't hard. They asserted this crime happened between 2 and 4 p.m. But Angel, she didn't even get off the school bus until 2:45. Then they alleged Angel and Murray walked from her grandparents' house to Cookie's house, a 2.5-mile-long walk with lots of twists and turns and side streets and no sidewalk. At minimum, it would take 45 minutes to walk to Cookie's place from Angel's grandparents' house. And when you added it all up, that left 15 minutes to commit this crime. It was physically impossible. Now they just needed to knock down the one piece of damning evidence against Angel. Those 2 fingerprints on that duct tape. Her fingerprints weren't found anywhere else in the home, just on that tape. But how did they get there? If they could explain how the fingerprints got on the tape, then Angel was free. It was Angel's grandfather, Bayless, who had the eureka moment. Bayless was a handyman. He had a workshop in his garage. He remembered Angel used to spend a lot of time back there with him. She picked up and played with things all the time. She could have easily picked up some duct tape, played with it, then put it back. And, Bayless said, back in 2009, he worked for Franklin Bonner. He did odd jobs for Cookie all the time. He must have left behind some duct tape. The same roll of duct tape those killers happened to grab that terrible day. Angel's attorneys liked this version of events. There was no way to timestamp a fingerprint. So it was possible those prints could have been on there for months, even years, from Angel playing with that tape. It wasn't perfect, but it was plausible. And plausible was all they needed for a jury to determine reasonable doubt, which would mean a not guilty verdict. In October of 2019, the trial began, and it spanned a total of 3 days. And over the course of those days, it seemed obvious to everyone just how little evidence the prosecution had. And her attorneys emphasized, as much as they could, how Angel was a child when this happened, and how she was kind of a weakling. She was not even 5 feet tall back then, and only weighed about 80 pounds. How could she have possibly participated in such a grisly murder? But then, the prosecution introduced the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's forensic expert. And when she testified about the fingerprints, she noted a distinct and damning detail. Angel's latent fingerprints were found on the sticky side of the duct tape. Those prints, in her opinion, were the kind you could only leave from touching and tearing off strips of that tape, just like the strip she tore off from that tape to hand over to her co-defendant, Murray Vaughn. But even with that testimony, there were so many other loose ends, and one very loose cannon. The lead detective, Carl Fields. When he took the stand, he shared a few bits and pieces of information from the original investigation. Nothing to do with Murray Vaughn, but some crucial intel he had on Grandma Shirley. According to Carl Fields, phone records revealed Shirley was the last person who called Cookie. And according to Carl, when he interviewed her years ago, she admitted she'd gone to Cookie's house that day and even bought a couple of joints from him. So it seemed, from Carl Fields' testimony, it was Angel's Grandma Shirley who was one of the last people, if not the last person, to see Franklin Bonner alive. The jury was no doubt aware Shirley was not a suspect. She was not on trial. And yet, with Detective Fields' testimony, an awareness, an aura of some kind of possible Bumpass family conspiracy. Things got even worse when the prosecution called Grandma Shirley herself to the stand. Shirley strutted in, her short hair tinted a very dramatic shade of deep red. Nothing about Shirley screamed Grandma. And yet, when she took the stand, her memory seemed to fail her. Her testimony, a haze of senior moments. When she was asked what happened that day in January of 2009, had she called him that day? Did she go over to Cookie's place? Had she bought marijuana from him? Poor Grandma Shirley. She couldn't remember. How could she remember? It was 10 years ago. Throughout the entire trial, Angel had a terrible feeling. She didn't feel like her lawyers were fighting hard enough for her. She knew she hadn't gone to law school, but weren't you supposed to object once in a while? Maybe she should take the stand. If the jury got to hear her side, maybe they'd see she was innocent. But her attorneys were clear. They're going to ask you about that duct tape, and if you don't have an answer, you will look guilty. Besides, Angel's case and Murray Vaughn's case were linked, and throughout Murray's side of this trial, there was no mention of Angel anywhere. And with the paltry amount of evidence against Murray Vaughn, he was bound to be found not guilty. Which meant, no matter what, Angel would also be found not guilty by default. Period. On that third day, the jury deliberated. 5 hours later, they came back with their verdict. It was hard to know if this was good news or bad news. It had to be good news, because 5 hours wasn't enough to discuss guilty verdicts, but it was enough time to determine this whole case was ridiculous. So Murray Vaughn and Angel sat at their respective tables with their counsel. They were told Murray Vaughn's verdict would come first. Murray was asked to stand as the forewoman read the verdict aloud. They, the jury, found the defendant, Murray Vaughn, not guilty. Oh, thank God. Because if Murray wasn't guilty, Angel wasn't either. Now it was Angel's turn to stand. The jury forewoman spoke once again. With respect to count 1, first-degree murder, the jury found the defendant, Angel Bumpass, guilty. With respect to the second count, especially aggravated robbery, the jury found Angel Bumpass guilty. She was guilty on all counts. She was to be taken into custody immediately. For the entire trial, Angel kept her face calm. She was told The jury was always watching her, always gauging her every reaction. She wasn't supposed to look angry or frustrated. If she was to look anything, her lawyer said to look pitiful. But now with this verdict, her careful facade collapsed, and fury took over. She yelled for someone to get her out of this courtroom. She didn't want to be here. She needed to leave. Not to escape as her mother once attempted, but to retreat in bitter defeat. She might have been the only person convicted of a crime to ever walk ahead of the guards as she left the courtroom. She just wanted it over with. She was never going to see her kids again. In October of 2019, Angel Bumpass began her 60-year sentence. When she got out of prison to hug her daughters again one day, it would be the year 2070. Angel would be 85 years old. Her daughters, they'd be well into their 60s. But that was that. She was incarcerated. Just like her mother, her brothers, her family, her fate, stuck together. Stuck forever. And the last shot of the A&E episode was of Angel's lawyer, Andrea, tears streaming down her cheeks, with a look of disbelief. So that was that. The case was closed, which meant the episode was over. But for millions of people who watched the episode when it aired in 2020, the fight for Angel was just beginning. People were upset. There was a flurry of activity, petitions, YouTube videos, fundraisers, and with all of the exposure around this case, Angel's aunt and other close family members swore they'd find a way to get Angel out of this mess. And they planned to do it, this time with a veteran criminal defense attorney named William Massey. William Massey and his colleagues had something Angel's previous counsel did not. He had the benefit of time. In 2022, roughly 3 years or so since Angel's trial, a lot had happened in Hamilton County. In the almighty powers who helped put Angel away, they were no longer in charge. This included the original district attorney, who, after a series of corruption scandals, left the DA's office in disgrace. In his place was a new DA. Her name was Cody Wamp, and she won the race by being tough on crime. But William Massey was hopeful. Cody Wamp was a millennial, a new generation. Perhaps she'd be willing to view Angel's circumstances with fresh eyes. Then there was the matter of Detective Carl Fields. During Angel's first trial, her attorneys didn't seem to be aware that this lead detective, Carl Fields, had been fired from the Hamilton County Police Department in 2014 after he displayed profoundly inappropriate behavior. This included accusations of planting evidence, harassing witnesses, and while working as an investigator in sex crimes, he sent flirtatious texts and even struck up a romantic relationship with a victim. With his credibility completely trashed, there were all kinds of new questions about whether his testimony, especially around Grandma Shirley, was true, or if he'd made the whole thing up. But William Massey wasn't sure if he could prove that. His strategy was to get Angel's case in front of this new district attorney with some new bit of evidence, something anything this DA could latch onto. Because Angel's case had generated so much attention and such an outpouring of sympathy. No one wanted to be the one blamed for keeping a woman behind bars for 60 years for a crime she committed as a child, if she did it at all. So William Massey had to get creative. He decided he'd have Angel Bumpass take a lie detector test. And at first, it seemed like a terrible risk. Results from polygraph tests weren't admissible in court, and they hadn't been in Tennessee since 1958, right around the time Franklin Bonner graduated from high school. But William Massey swore there was a whole new next-level type of polygraph, one that promised an accuracy rate of 97% versus the previous 60%. And in this new world of lie detectors, Angel Bumpass was only going to answer 2 straightforward questions. Question number 1. Were you present when Franklin Bonner was taped to the chair? And question number 2. Did you put any duct tape on Franklin Bonner? Somewhere in a glass office building in Memphis, Angel Bumpass sat with wires on her hands, her heart, and her stomach as she gave answers to those 2 questions. No. And no. Soon enough, the results came back. Angel Tierra Tamika Bumpass did not show unresolved responses to the relevant questions. In other words, she told the truth. When the results were presented to the new DA, she ordered another polygraph test, this time with someone in law enforcement. And Angel passed again. Now, that wasn't enough for a retrial, but it did get Angel a special hearing. And in that hearing, no one knew what to expect. This new district attorney could make Angel an example of how she was tough on crime, keeping the streets safe from people like Angel Bumpass and the whole Bumpass family of criminals. Or she could reconsider the whole case, which the DA did. And in that court hearing, she declared the state's position. She believed Angel was involved. However, as certain as she was of Angel's involvement, she was also certain Angel did not commit this crime by herself. Based on the evidence, it was virtually impossible a 13-year-old girl could have done this alone. So where did that leave things? And this is when the district attorney said something heartening. That it was not the state's role to seek convictions. It was the state's role to seek truth. And as hard as this was to explain to Franklin Bonner's family, in the deepest part of her soul, she believed Angel serving a life sentence was not justice. And with that, Angel's case was dismissed. But at that time, the DA was clear the case was dismissed without prejudice, which meant if some type of new evidence came to light that implicated Angel, she could be back in court and tried all over again. This is not the case with Murray Vaughn. Because he was acquitted, this is double jeopardy. He cannot be tried for the same crime twice, which means he's free to say whatever he wants and whatever he knows about what happened to Franklin Bonner. And yet, he maintains his innocence, and he hasn't said a word that would help investigators figure out what happened with this case. And Franklin Bonner's murder remains unsolved. For Angel, she's back in Kentucky, reunited with her daughters and trying to build a new life for herself. One that this time has a little glimmer of glamour, with plans to be an esthetician, here to make the world a more beautiful place, one face at a time. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another episode of Dead Sleep. The May bonus episode will be out next week. So if you'd like to enjoy that, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Until then, nighty-night.